Thank you very much for coming along to this session on identity and intersectionality at Brookes. Today, members of the LGBT Staff Forum, the Disability Staff Forum chaplaincy will talk about the groups. Sadly, our colleague from the BME Staff Network is not particularly well today. My name is Sebastian Blake. I am Quality Manager within the Commercial Services team in the university. I am also the chair of the LGBT+ Staff Network.
Okay, I'm Fran Jenkins. I'm Coordinator of the Staff Disability Network. So Fran Jenkins, Coordinator of the Staff Disability Network, and I also work in the academic office as my day job.
I'm Shemal Matthew. I'm the Anglican chaplain for Brookes University. So I work with the chaplains, work within the well-being in chaplaincy team.
Thank you very much. What we wanted to do today is quickly talk about what the university does. We're very fortunate also to have Deco from the Students' Union joining us a little bit later, and we'll talk about the individual groups as well. But the theme of the Human Rights Film Festival is identity, and it strikes me that we represent very specific parts of our identities, but actually there's a lovely term, intersectionality, which effectively means you are multiple identities. And I think one of the fascinating things for me about identity is I would almost class it as a mixture of so many different things, because there are identities that you have no choice about. There are identities that sometimes you may choose. There are identities that are chosen for you because there are perceptions of what your identity should be from society, and people are either happy with that or they rebel against it and want to move that identity forward. So there's so many different aspects. From my point of view, I'm a white European male with both English, British and German identities mixed together, because that is what I suppose that makeup would be. I'm an atheist who's intensely interested in religion and why the importance of that for people. I'm a gay male, and I have struggled with that identity in the past and have come to accept that and be proud of that more recently. And I'm also severely dyslexic, so I have an identity which is disabled but not visible disability. So I then have the choice of being able to say to people whether I hold that identity or not and what that means to me. So there's a lot bundled together there. And I'm sure all of us have a lot of different bundled identities and what it means to us. So I think it's an opportunity for all of us, if you would like to contribute later, to actually saying what your identities are and why it's important to you, if you choose to. Quickly from the Staff LGBT Network, we started about 2.5 to 3 years ago, and partly because one of the staff members, who is now flashing up on the screen here, said, why don't we have a network like Oxford University does of LGBT+ staff members? And I was like, yeah, that's a good question, let's crack on and get it sorted. So we're a self-organized group of people who just wanted to get together and promote what it means to be LGBT+ within the university and organize events. And I see a number of colleagues who have been kind enough to support that throughout the university, and thank you very much for all the work we've done. And we started off organising a lot of stuff around LGBT History Month to raise awareness, but we've taken a very specific philosophy that we have a joint group, so we organise our events with the LGBT+ student group as well. So we're doing a lot of that promotion events, and then we have separate socials. But it also means that if there is a specific issue from a staff group, then we can get together with our student colleagues and actually say we should probably campaign on this together and move things forward, and vice versa, and it's worked really quite nicely from that point of view. One of the other things we've been looking at is the university has become a member of Stonewall, which is an LGBT+ charity in this country. And we've just entered their accreditation for businesses, and we're pleased to say for our first batch we got halfway up the list of all organisations on our first time, so we're definitely going to be winding our way up that list even further. So very pleased with that. One of the other things we do is try and raise awareness. So We have been fortunate that a number of staff members have been comfortable enough to create the LGBT plus staff profiles you'll see here. And there's some interesting points. Oxford University's main lecture this year had a gentleman who organised a lot of things around Muslim pride and a blog, and he said actually the interesting thing about pride, and I think it applies to pretty much all identities, is one of them is presence. And actually, to have a positive presence in who you are presented to the world means that people are probably more likely to be accepting. And it's that continuous process of doing so and trying to get that understanding across. And I think that's so important, particularly if you're trying to challenge things that you don't necessarily like people's preconceptions of what might be. Actually, changing that preconception is a positive thing. The other nice thing from a presence point of view is we've recently got lanyards, and a large number of people have been comfortable enough to wear them throughout the university. It's really fantastic as well because about 500 disappeared within the space of a month, and it's quite difficult to actually find a member of the LGBT community wearing these in the university now, which is wonderful. So lots of people are very supportive and really appreciate that as well. The other nice thing we do is we work with other networks, which I think is probably where I will come across to Frances, if that's okay.
Yeah. Okay, so I joined Brookes last January, and one of the earliest bits of advice I got was that if I wanted to progress my career, I needed to network more. And I was born with my disability, and I've always managed it. And when I say manage, I think I've tried to minimise it and not let it be a large part of my identity, although in other people's perceptions, I guess it was. But I decided that I was going to be out and proud about disability, and I would join the Staff Disability Network, but it didn't exist. But thanks to help from people like Sebastian and from Jane Butcher and her colleagues in EDI, we got it up and running last summer. It's much newer and less developed than the LGBT plus network and BME networks, but we're learning from our colleagues, and I think we'll be expanding. I thought that Brookes was going to be a good place to be out as a disabled person because I think an awful lot is done for students, and I was surprised really that nothing had existed for staff, and hopefully that's going to change. I think Brookes has a really good, strong commitment to the social model of disability, that those of us with impairments, mental or physical, are disabled by our environment, and it's the impairment is a private matter, and it's the disabling features in society that make life difficult. However, I think that there are still lots of attitudinal barriers, and I think the story continuously from staff is that policies are in place, that it's a good, friendly, supportive environment, but it's individuals you come across, and I think that what we're trying to do is to support each other increasingly and try and get the message out there that disabled people can play a very positive part in the life of Brookes and beyond. I think my own identity, as I say, I try to minimise and manage my impairment because I'd learned very early on when I left university that if I mentioned my disability I didn't get a job interview. If I didn't mention it, then I could go along and at least stand a chance of persuading people that my education, my abilities were such I could get a job. But I've changed that now, and I think that we do need more disabled staff role models, and I really want to spread the message that we can do useful things. I think the other thing that changed my identity was when I became a mother, because I suddenly realised that I had to present a very positive image of disability to my own child, and I think that helped me along the road. So now I think I would describe myself as European, northern, disabled, and a bit mouthy.
Yeah. We'll go with a bit.
Yeah, just a bit.
I think the interesting thing from both LGBT and staff networks, from a representation point of view, is it really struck me when we sat down and had one of the opening sessions around the disability network that there's so many different disabilities, both visible and not visible, and the idea of being able to represent them as a chair is really weird. In the same way that I obviously have a great deal of life experience on what it means to be a lesbian, and can represent that. My extensive experience of having a trans or non-binary identity is massive. But you've got to kind of put the hat on that actually it's about, once again, listening to people's experiences and being willing to champion them. because even though if they're not yours, then actually it doesn't mean it's not important. And I think particularly in the gay community we have great challenges with gay white men going out and representing everybody else to the exclusion of everything, and that comes up as a theme again and again and again with bi-visibility, trans, minority groups in the community. Thank you very much for joining us, Deco.
Hi.
Right, we're just going to... Would you like to?
Okay, my name is Shamil Matthew. I'm the Anglican chaplain for the university. Looking at my identity, I was born and brought up in Kerala, which is always in holiday programs, by the way, in southern India. And I came to this country as a student and stayed on for a long time, now 15 years later. I am ordained as an Anglican priest. So I work for the Diocese of Oxford. I'm sent to Brookes, or I'm employed by Diocese of Oxford to work in Brookes as a chaplain. So one of the biggest things I face being a chaplain and wearing one of these is that people often ask me, what do you do? I say, well, I'm an Anglican priest. And people sometimes tell me, you don't look like an Anglican priest. So I'm like, what? How do an Anglican, what is it seems to be an Anglican priest is? It's often is a middle-aged, white, Anglo-Saxon person who doesn't have much of a smile on his face. That's what I think. Which is weird. Most of the priests whom I met were quite happy. Anyway, I'm also married to a priest. My wife is a priest. She used to work in Oxford Diocese, and I have 2 children. So my identity is as a dad, as an ethnic minority person working in a white middle-class agency or institution, and coming to work in a very diverse society or very diverse institution like Brookes. So that is my identity coming together. But my academic studies, I'm also interested in belonging and how it forms your identity. So my master's from Oxford, I did a study on multiple religious identities. How can people belong to more than one religious tradition, and how can you form your identity from that? The age that people seem to say that I am Church of England, end of it. That is kind of over. Because even as a Church of England priest, I don't see myself as only Church of England. I'm Church of England, I'm Church of South India where I was brought up, and in my religious identity I see loads of things. And I have taken up practices from a whole load of identities, whole load of religious traditions. For example, my studies are mainly focused on Hinduism, and I teach Hinduism in a number of universities. So I have arrived in universities wearing my dog collar. And I was asked, we didn't know that Hindu priests wear a dog collar. I said, well, I am not a Hindu priest, I'm an Anglican priest, but I happen to be an expert on one specific form of Hinduism. So I teach that. So that is also part of my identity. So as a chaplaincy, we have a fantastic group of people. We're not just one Anglican chaplain, we have a fantastic group of people who are ready to work with you and listen to you, either religious identity questions or non-religious identity questions. One of the things I am passionate about is celebrating festivals. So for last week we've been celebrating Holi. So it was fantastic because it was a snow day and we couldn't go anywhere, so we celebrated in one of the halls of residence, and we got coloured in different colours. My lanyard is still multicolored. It's not one of the multicolored lanyards, but it did get loads of colour on it, because we were covered in colours. And in a couple of weeks' time, we'll be celebrating Easter. I think belonging to any group or anything is to be celebrated. The festivals do play a major role. So if you have a particular religious tradition or religious festival you want to celebrate, come and see us. We'll do it. And we'll do it as big as we can. If we can do it in the middle of Brookes, we will. Like we sung carols last year, so we're up for it. Come and talk to us.
Lovely. Thank you very much. And Deco, would you be kind enough to talk about the Students' Union?
Hi, so can you hear me at the back? Brilliant, great. So I'm Deco Blackings. I'm the current president of Brookes Union until July. I'm actually the first black woman to be elected into the post, so it's great, but it also means that you're breaking ground that hasn't really been traversed before, which I think when you grow up in school you always want to be number one and be the first, but when you actually are the first, it's not as cracked up as it seems to be. And actually, you just wish someone else had gone there before you. I have a really diverse team this year. LGBT, also BME. I've been really thankful about that this year. And worked really hard to make sure that the part-time officers, so I have 3 vice presidents and then a portfolio of part-time officers, and we managed to increase liberation in all of those groups, from BME to trans to LGBT within the year. And those things don't just happen by chance, they're deliberate things. You have to be conscious, you have to meet with those groups and really encourage them to take up those spaces. You have to make sure that you put in the work yourself too. I know that we always strive for like equality and diversity and to get people into the room, but actually getting people into the room is one thing, but getting them to stay in the room is something completely different. And you have to make sure you cultivate an environment people can be there, which I've had to learn is really challenging, but that's a big part of what I do. And it can be thankless, but it's worth it because it's just about getting people in there. So that's a lot of what the union does, representing students on things like welfare, education, societies. I can see a society president in here who I'm going to call out. It's Taquan. Taquan's been a great president this year for African Caribbean Society. He's really pushed, he has a committee of all women, has really pushed feminism, intersectionality, and actually like, there's really great leadership within the Students' Union, which you don't always see on other campuses. So that's a little bit about what I do. I mean, I sit in the university at meetings representing students, being a student, talking about the issues that are impacting them, from things like debt, student finance, why is my curriculum not diverse, or why is my curriculum white, disability access, why do we not have enough LGBT scholars and within the curriculum, those sorts of things. So my week is really varied. I go into the room and this is the first identity people see, and then have to remember all the other identities that aren't my own that I have to take into the room as well and make sure they're represented as well, which all of us can do. It's not just me that can do that, we all should do that at all points. So that's kind of what I do. Ish.
That's grand, thank you very much. And with that point that you've so eloquently made, I will very quickly talk about the BME staff network, if I may.
I think Ewan was over.
Are you?
Kind of, yes.
Yes, please.
Not quite sure, but yeah. So my name is Yue, and I'm one of the academic staff, and I'm part of the BME staff network at Brookes. And things that the BME staff network was created 1.5 years ago, and it's growing. And the things that we've tried to include support staff, professional staff, and also academic staff into the group, addressing intersectionality and also how to incorporate an inclusive learning and teaching environment for everyone. So yeah, and also one of our big project is to diversify the curriculum. I'm in law, and also I teach company law, so diversifying that is a little bit of a challenge, but I mean, I think if it takes one academic initiative to get the ball rolling. So yeah, in a sense, the BME staff network is very, very much helpful for me as an academic, because I find solidarity within the academic staff and also the professional staff. And also, in a sense, in academia, it's a very, very lonely journey. So having support staff network in terms of BME and also the LGBT, it makes the academic journey less lonely, and also it incorporates a lot of ideas. So I'm growing in a sense of an academic, and also I'm growing in a sense of like acquiring skills. So it's very much of a fruitful venture.
Thank you very much. Right, we're about 1:30, which means we have half an hour for exploration of identities or questions, depending on what you fancy. But if you are willing, if you'd like to contribute to what your identity actually means to you and why, that'd be great, or any of them, or the intersectionalities between them, it'd be wonderful. Or if you have a question for anybody here, crack on. Yeah?
Okay. Should I stand up? Can you all hear me?
Yeah.
Excellent. I'm really pleased you're having this debate, because intersectionality has been something that's been really important to me personally. Very helpful when I finally found the activist term for it. I'm a black British Caribbean woman. I'm also bisexual. I've just found out in the last couple of weeks that I have ADHD. I didn't know that before. I went through my whole kind of childhood and adult life without knowing that. So that's really valuable, so thank you. In terms of DK, you said something about being the first black woman. I was elected to a town council as the first black woman. It is challenging, but what I would say is sometimes you inspire people without even knowing it. Sometimes I've come across people years later who have heard a talk or seen something, and it's been really valuable to them. So, you know, take that as something that you will have done, even if you don't know it yet.
Thank you.
Just thank you to all the speakers. It's been really interesting.
Yeah.
Can I ask Sue a question and then a follow-up? Would you agree in the fluidity of identity? You can't just be one single thing.
No. I would agree in the fluidity of identity. Identity is a strange thing, and I'll take it from the LGBT plus community. We have the plus because there are a lot of more identities that sit within it. So traditionally, people probably would start to define themselves as L, G, B, or T, and now you're starting to move into a wonderful world where people are saying, actually, I don't really identify with any of those labels that are previously there. So you've now got things like gender fluidity, the idea that actually people simply don't feel like they're either a man or a woman. Doesn't mean they want to change their base gender, but they don't necessarily identify. And that can partly be also a reaction to what is prescribed as you being a man or a woman in society. So they just don't identify with that, being non-binary as well.
For the question of identity for me is also, you said is it fluid, but the Western understanding of identity is often related to what you think you are, whereas if you think in a different way, in a relational terms like Booba, you'll be thinking that you are because you relate to somebody in a particular way. So if you move from your own thinking to the other person's presence and how the people view us, it's a different perspective, which means that you have a million identities. Depends how many people you know. Because for my son, it doesn't mean anything that I'm the chaplain. He does something in the university and comes back home. That's all he does. He knows about it. So it depends how you think. It's an identity formed by the other. It's an I-thou relationship rather than I think, therefore I am. I think we need to move away from it to find our own identities because people are presenting us different things. So, yeah.
It's very true. And also, if you're looking at certain aspects of BME, LGBT, and disabled identities, actually we've spent an awful lot of time trying to fight back from the negative identities that have been given to us, in many instances by others. So the Pride movement, the very Pride rainbow things that people are wearing today, that is, no, we're not going to be put down by the identity we've been given by someone else, and now it's moved into a positive. And I would argue there are many aspects of BME, and also the very word disabled is we lack the ability to be able. That's the actual word. And, you know, the idea when people have been given that label to then actually go, there's a load of positives from it, is a very powerful change. So that's a fluidity of movement. Sorry, what was the second question?
This was in relation to you four representatives, just to understand any further discussion. What are your sentiments towards an attitude in which you need a unitary identity for social integrity, in relation to this whole sense of fluidity and arguing that communities can often be perceived as imagined, if you will?
Interesting one.
I think I appreciate like the notion behind it, and I think there are some identities that within certain groups can be more fluid in terms of perhaps gender and LGBT, but I do think that as much as I'd like to, so there's some situations in my life where like being white would just be a lot easier, and if I could just imagine myself as being white, as much as I try, I won't be white in that situation. I can't reimagine that identity. I can't change other people's perceptions of this identity. This is how I'm then perceived, so that identity does stick. And I think particularly around race and in that particular area, I don't think it's as fluid. I don't think it really changes or moves anywhere. I think it's just, it doesn't change over time. I know that there's been some debates around it with like Rachel Dozier and like can you be transracial and that kind of stuff, and I think I'm not there with it. I think that doesn't really move. I think other identities in our life, like our faith or our relationship within our family or maybe our nationality, those things can change, those things can adapt over time, but I don't think every single area is as fluid in that respect, and I don't think the politics of language works in each liberation group in the same way as it may stand in one to another. I don't think it's necessarily, it doesn't translate or come across in the same way due to different historical narratives. So in some communities, identity is a lot more fluid, maybe in our faith walk and those sorts of things, but not everywhere is it applicable.
Yeah, and I do think that in disability it can be fluid, because I think increasingly that there's an issue of people becoming disabled as people live longer. Mm-hmm. There are more disabled people, more people discovering disability and responding in a completely different way to that disability than if they'd been born with it. And in a previous life I worked for the European Disability Forum, and I did notice not just differences in the different disabilities, mental and physical, but also in when those disabilities were acquired and the responses to it. And I also find that I'm choosing to be disabled in this particular environment because it's a very receptive one, it's what I'm here to talk about. But in other contexts, it can be hidden. So when I speak to people on the phone, when I'm emailing people, I'm interacting in that way, and I'm choosing not to say I'm disabled, and I feel a different person. And there are times when my disability is, it's possible to see it, but from a distance you might not necessarily know it. So I sometimes choose to reveal it in different circumstances, or to minimise it, just like clicking that screen on the minimise button, and I become someone else. So in certain situations, I'm a woman or I'm a mother, and I'm increasingly finding I'm an older person, and that's quite a scary concept as well.
It's the same thing for LGBT identities, because we have a choice about whether we're in or out in environments, and it's usually about whether we feel comfortable or not to be in or out. So at home in my village I am not, and that will remain the case. And to my older, quite right-wing Christian relatives in England, they probably will be very surprised to get my wedding invite, and they may never speak to me again. That's the reality. But that's the thing. I think it is probably the fundamental difference in a lot of identities when it comes to aspects around race, that we can choose about when we are, because we will either feel threatened or not, and that is the thing. It's an interesting one. Elaine?
Yeah, I wanted to pick up on a couple of points. One was about the labelling thing, because I'm very much of the view that people like labels because they feel safe with labels and they kind of think they know what they're dealing with, but as we know, people don't fit neatly into one box, and the trouble is this is also underpinned by our legislative framework that seems to think people fit neatly into one of the 9 protected characteristics. And obviously the way equalities work is going is towards inclusion, where we try and work at it from the point of view that everybody's included, and we might need to make a few adjustments along the way. The thing I do want to pick up though is also how at this stage of our journey, how important it is to have role models for people who are brave enough to stand up and be counted, because it's so important for people to see people like them and to know that they are included, and it's a very difficult balance to achieve, particularly when there are some people, I include myself, who don't really have a neat label I can pin myself from the multiple identities that I have. But it is something that is important where people feel able to say I'm whatever, so that we can have a sort of be more open about it and show people that we are diverse and that we do actually genuinely include everybody. So, say that.
Do you have a question? Anybody else? Yeah.
Would you guys all agree that we should work together to create a more inclusive environment on a cross-cultural global scale? Right? Would you believe that we should establish as a global community a similar means of communication to understand each other in order to establish such infrastructure in the future?
The whole understanding of homogeneity, I don't think it's going to work. I believe that we are moving into multiple centers in religion and politics. There is no one center for world. For example, I study Christian history, for example. Once upon a time, there was a center. Europe was the center. It's no longer the center of Christianity. There are more Christians elsewhere in the world than in Europe. In the same way, none of the power is not going to be concentrated in one place. And the pyramid organizations are failing. What we are looking at is more and more amoeba organizations here, there, and everywhere, connected. Interconnectivity, yes. Homogeneity, no. That's where I would go. It is my diversity that makes me special, and I would like to celebrate it, my difference. It's my identity. Whereas I don't disagree with anyone else who has a different identity. I celebrate their identity too. So we are interconnected, but not homogeneous. That's what I believe.
Sorry, just to follow up, I think keeping the conversation alive, like keeping a dialogue, not just a unilateral but a multilateral dialogue, and keep it alive, is the essential way to look for some sort of a normativity. Because homogeneity doesn't really correspond with normativity. Because normativity is the essential good, and essential good cut across all genders, all cultural, and all that. So in order to distill this truth, keeping a dialogue alive with everyone, is essential.
Yeah, there is no dialogue without identity.
Yeah, exactly.
If you are all the same, there is no dialogue, is there? Mm-hmm. So dialogue is, yeah,
diversity and dialogue. So.
Yeah.
But I think we also have to recognise that people communicate in different ways at different levels.
Yes.
So really, you always have to take that into account. And a recent example I had was that I was attending an office away day, and I was asked about my accessibility needs. I thought, great, that's the box ticked. I was very pleased. And people made assumptions about the way I could communicate, and they assumed that, visual impairment, large piece of paper. I have a very narrow field of vision, and a large piece of paper makes it hard. But people just make assumptions about what was the best way to communicate with me, and actually that made it worse. So I think the listening is key to the communication, as well as the getting the messages across.
Agreed.
Sorry in advance if my question doesn't make sense, because that's a massive short thought.
Sorry, what did you say?
Sorry, I was saying, I haven't asked my question yet. I was saying, sorry if it doesn't make sense in advance, because sometimes I'm a massive extreme of thought and it doesn't make sense. Do you think sometimes by trying to foster diversity and embrace different forms of identity, ultimately we try and fail in doing that and ultimately ratify those forms of identity? One example I find sometimes try and include race, for example, with race or LGBT, where try and talk about it, but ultimately does it not recreate the boundaries between them? Or for example, one personal example is by trying people I'm from another country, and by people always identifying me as that person from another country, sometimes just make me feel as just the person from the other country. So it's just quite alienating, or for people from another non-binary identities, if their friends just identify them as their friend from another non-binary identity. Is it just the way they see them? And sometimes it's not necessarily from bad motives, but in our efforts to foster diversity, are we not failing? And where is the boundary, and are we just not reproducing that? And obviously we should not stop trying to foster diversity, but
so
is it you mean people are more than just their labels? So it's like you don't want people to
Like,
just be
we
defined
like,
by
we
one
want to
label.
we want to embrace our identities, but also where's the limit between just labeling and embracing?
Well, you say that, but black people are always labelled as black people first.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
Like, I'm not saying that, but I think, for example, like reading, that's like, for example, one like thing I'm trying to engage at the moment is like, obviously, I'm obviously not black, and I want to try and engage with issues of race, but I'm also conscious that I don't want to do it in a way that's not harmful, because I have obviously no experience and what it is to be black. And I guess that's, and like, I will probably make a mistake along the way. Yeah, and yeah, it is hard, and it will be. But you don't want to, yeah. But at the same time, I feel like there's like, I think it's Judith. Is it Judith Butler? She talks about the fact that like white people have the privilege of not, of saying, oh, but like there's no grey, like everyone is just human. But that's a white privilege to say, oh, everyone is just human. There's nothing as race because they're not raced and they're just people. But that's a white people privilege. So it's the balance. It's just massive. Yeah. It's just finding that balance.
I think you've just answered your own question there, which is
Yeah.
that you might want to not have a label, but some people will still put that on you, whether you want to or not. Like if someone says, oh, sees you as a black person, or sees someone as, identifies them.
Yeah, and how can we engage with each other to know that?
I think the point is that people might identify as the box that they tick, but people will always put boxes around other people, whether or not that's even true. And there have been cases, going back to the point someone made about the legislation and classifications in terms of employment, that does cover people who are assumed. So if somebody's assumed to be gay and discriminated against, even if they're not gay, they still have that legislation protecting them. You obviously don't have quite so many of those cases with race, perhaps, except that really random woman who's the trans black person, whatever, but fairly small scale, I think.
but also, I don't want people to forget that I don't want people to forget those identities, because the fact that I'm black means that I've struggled with certain aspects of life and I've struggled with barriers. I want people to acknowledge that, actually. I don't ever want them to forget it. So I don't mind. I mind how people say it sometimes. But I don't mind people acknowledging that, because I think it's actually a strengthening aspect if they're trying to engage with my experience.
I think the interesting thing is the reason prejudice broadly exists is because we will instantaneously react to some feedback, and then we feed back into whatever that means to us. And regardless of what your identity is, that is either going to be a positive reinforcement of previous experience, or actually if it's challenged, it'll be a negative reinforcement. I suppose there's just an interesting point. I sometimes am concerned that some of the right-wing reaction that seems to be happening around the world seems to almost come immediately after gay marriage and certain other degree of liberalisation of a number of minorities. And some research might indicate that actually we've got a lot of positive representation at the moment from a whole series of areas, but actually there might be other groups in society just don't feel they're getting the positive recognition. So is there something around there that we should be doing as well? I'm not sure.
It's also changing the perception, because I was brought up as a conservative evangelical. I never, in India, where homosexuality is illegal, and I never had any friends, so I was scared of gay people. So when I came to this country, two of my close friends, after being my friends for a couple of months, they said that, oh, we are gay. And I was like, oh, these are fantastic people. So how does it work? That is the realization. We need to know people first before putting them into boxes. Because, once you know the people, you will change. And that's the openness of change. Once you know who people are people. And you learn to love them, or you learn to exist with them beyond their identity. That's a big difference, isn't it?
I think, forgive me if I'm candid, but I'm just going to be. I think with race, you have to just be comfortable becoming uncomfortable and dealing with it. Because I think when it comes to our TV, our music, our media, our fashion, our food, we don't have a problem taking food from other cultures and enjoying it, or music, or clothing, or hair, or whatever it is. We seem to not be afraid of that. We don't worry about taking a trip to Thailand and being in a completely different environment. But somehow when we find ourselves in a room where maybe we're not a person of colour and everyone else in the room is a person of colour, then we're suddenly afraid. And actually you weren't afraid when you booked your trip to China, and you weren't afraid when you decided to do a gap year in Japan, or you weren't afraid when you went to Notting Hill Carnival, or you go to that club night that's dancehall. And I think it's about understanding that maybe there's an issue with the perception of where you see those people and where you assume or think they should be. Because it wasn't a problem when we were accessing that culture and going there, but it's suddenly an issue when they're in your work environment and actually maybe they're producing better work than you, or actually they're being recognised for something that you didn't know that they could do. Because when people come here to work, as a woman of colour, as a black woman, my focus isn't like, I'm a black woman, so I'm going to do black things every single day. My focus is maybe I want to work in banking. So I'm just trying to paint a story here, which is that when people come here to this organisation or anywhere it is as a person of colour, their focus is just to go there and do that job and be the best accountant or lawyer or teacher or doctor or, I don't know, firefighter, whatever it is, that's what they chose to do. And then you need to allow that to be that, and where their identities are there and you're noticing it, you need to just take a step back and just let them thrive in that working environment, because they didn't come here to work on equality or race or diversity issues. They literally just came here to be themselves and just focus. They didn't come here to change all of the equality related issues. And that's what I mean about being comfortable, being uncomfortable. Maybe when the issue is yours, the internet is there, books are there, the library's there, YouTube's there, there's books out there. You need to get comfortable being uncomfortable and figure out what is the thing that makes you feel uncomfortable. Was it a bad experience once upon a time about someone that made you feel a certain type of way? I don't know what it is. You'll know what it is. I'll know what it is. Everyone can have a prejudice somewhere. It could be with LGBT. We all have different privileges, and we all manage to excel in different spaces because maybe we're not identified by that one thing, that singularity. But just take the time and deep it. And if you offend someone, take it lovingly. The person's telling you because they know that you're better than that, and there's something that you can work on and it's resolvable. And I get checked too for if I say something that, I guess I'm a home student, so it's very different, my experiences, to a black international student. So I have to check myself as well to make sure that I'm not just speaking on behalf of people because I have a British passport and I'm quite secure in this land, whereas that's not the same experiences that my other friends will have who've come here to study. So if someone's calling out on something, take it, go and learn about their identity, or don't go straight back to them right away. Take some time, really research that thing. And the internet is your friend, man, and it's free, so there really is no excuses out there.
Just really quickly, I think one of the challenges with what you could probably call heteronormative male white privilege is the difficulty about being privileged is you don't understand the anger, the deep-rooted anger that many minorities have because of the problems you've dealt with for a long time. So actually, if you're in a conversation, I've noticed a number of different forms across different identities, and people assume that they will almost understand the anger of the prejudice, but they don't get that, and that can be very shocking for people. So just be aware of that, because it's an odd observation.
Yeah, I'm just got a question. I'm not sure if I'm going to word it correctly, but if intersectionality is about noticing the differences between people at a disadvantage or discrimination, and those have been sort of the movements that have been happening with intersectional groups, or the groups within the intersectionality as a whole. Moving forward into the future, and looking, because you said before about it mostly coming from a negative light, standing up for a voice for what's already been negative. Now we have movements with good voices bringing things into a positive light. Is there a point where that positive light is reached and then we don't need to talk about intersectionality anymore, or maybe not talking about intersectionality anymore, but is there a line there where maybe I'm not sure, because that's what I'm trying to figure it out, because obviously for me I'm a black man, and knowing that the racial struggle is still going on when there are lots of things that have changed around the world, but it's still happening. And we can see the same thing with all the other intersections, with religion, with LGBT, things have changed and people can express themselves now. We can have this forum, which is amazing, and same with this disability as well. But where does that end, is the question, sort of, or does it end?
I think it only ends when there's genuine equality everywhere. And there are lots of other structural things that you can't necessarily see when we're in the room, which is like maybe the wage gap, maybe there are men in the room that earn more than women in the room, but those disparities do exist. Maybe there's colleagues with disabilities in the room that aren't earning as much as let's say non-stable colleagues, those sorts of things. Like if you look at the wage gap for Muslim women, particularly those of like Bangladeshi and Pakistani descent, like they earn way less than other types of women. Like there's so many inequalities there that are structural. Or just even something as simple, again, it's a big gap of African women tend to have the highest level of educational qualifications, but they don't earn more than white women. So it's not actually a meritocracy. If you were hired on your credentials, then surely black African women would be earning the most, but they're not. And actually it's those sorts of things that the numbers don't really lie. So there's a lot of structural inequalities that are there. So it's great we're all in the room, that's one thing. But actually we might all live in, some of us might live in postcodes of really high levels of crime and actually can't move out into somewhere else that has like less crime. Do you know what I mean? And I think when we get there, that'll be the norm. Like we won't be celebrating the fact we've had 2 women prime ministers that are both conservative. We might be like, great, we had 7 years of women prime ministers that aren't all conservative, or maybe all the leaders of all the political parties could all be women, or be minority women, or be Muslim women. Do you know what I mean? Or LGBT. But we're generally really, really not there. Like, even if we look at this room, we're still not there. When you go back to your office or your classroom and look at who's teaching you or your halls, we're still really not there.
Can I give a very religious answer?
By all means.
Okay, if I put it in my own religious tradition, I would say that there is no day when we stop working towards justice. The poor will always be with you. That's what Jesus said in some sense. So in the past, we were always told that, you will suffer in this world. It's fine because there's a heaven there. That's why Max said the religion is an opium for people, because, it's fine, you're suffering here. That's okay, because there's a heaven for you. So let the people enjoy their freedom. Let the rich enjoy their freedom and poor suffer. It's okay, because there's a heaven for the poor. But what now we are saying, as a priest, I'm saying is that, no, that's not what Jesus said. Jesus asked us to work here now because the kingdom is here. So you keep working towards it. Are you going to get there? No. But you work towards it. The little difference that you can make, keep doing it. So it's like the story of the little boy who is walking in the beach and seeing all these fish trapped in the beach. And he started throwing the fish back. And this old man came and told the little boy, why are you throwing this fish back? You're not going to make a difference. He picked up one fish and said, I'm making a difference to this fish. So I think that's all you can do. So justice is something that we have to keep working. And it's not going to end. There is no point. I don't think there's a point that will end. But we keep working. That's a whole goal of life.
We probably have time for one more question. I think you had your hand up.
Yeah, I'm paying.
Sorry.
There's no point backtracking. Okay.
Is there anything else anybody would like to add? Then thank you so much.
Actually, I have one.
Yep.
First of all, I agree with the points you made. As the kingdom of God is within and God's work here. And another comment I have before I ask the question. Obviously, race is not a fluid thing. You can't be fluid in your race. You're either black, white, or whatever. Maybe you're mixed race. But with Rachel, what's her face? She's not fooling anyone. We know she's not black. Unless you're blind, of course, you can't really say her. And my question is, we all have multiple identities, but which one, this is aimed at all of you, which one do you guys put about the rest? And you're not allowed to mention your physical appearance, so you can't say, I'm white, black, whatever. And your gender as well. And your occupation, sorry. Value the most.
Mine's my faith. I think my identity is very much rooted in Christ Jesus and the Bible. So most of my values and underpinnings come from that. And that's how I view my identity, and everything else is very secondary to me. yeah, that's that for me. Does that answer?
Yeah, it does.
Cool.
And for me, the identity that matters most to me is being a mother.
I probably would say being a person, in the sense that I try not to be a bad person.
Yeah, for me it will be faith. That's not my job. Priest is my job. That's where it goes. Because faith does put me in that position where I can define things and I can put identities. So I think faith is the core, because I believe, therefore I am, is one of my motives or one of my things.
Thank you.
That's a good ending question.
It is.
Did you plant that question?
Paying.
Thank you so much for everybody for coming along. I hope you found it interesting. And thank you so much for talking to me.